Okay. Good evening and good Erev Shabbos. Coming to Parsha Tzav already has, I think, like a real challenge for us in terms of our relationship with Chumash. We started already Truma, Tetzave, Vayak, Kisisa, Vayakel, Pekude, Vayikra. Right? We're a good 7 weeks into a discussion of matters that are very obscure and arcane to us, matters connected to the Mishkan, to the Beis Hamikdash, and particularly to the world of Karbanos. And I think a lot of us are scared on some level of the world of Karbanos, something very foreign to us. And that kind of the character study, I think, is very appealing to us. Let's say in Sefer Bereshis, the first half of Sefer Shmos is mostly missing. So I want to talk a little bit about three concepts that we find in this week's parsha that are rooted in the halachos of the karbanos, but have a much broader applicability. Two of which come from the Sefer Achinuch, and one is based on the Rambam. So it's interesting. The Sefer Achinuch has a general approach to mitzvos, and it's part of the reason the book is called the Sefer Achinuch, that he believes that the purpose of many mitzvos, perhaps most or the vast majority of mitzvos, is in some way to be an educational experience that is transformative in terms of working on our character. That it's all kind of this educational experience that's designed to make us into better people if we understand the meanings or the messages behind the mitzvahs, and particularly the idea that the karban, right, is not a exercise by which we are chalila, that we're like giving God food or a present or so forth, but they are rituals given to us to be able to elevate ourselves and to improve ourselves. So we have a concept both in this week's and last week's parsha that even though that there are karbanos that are made out of grain, right, what we call a karban mincha, with essentially one major exception, that there is a prohibition that grain should be allowed to become chametz, right, should be allowed to become leavened, right, which again certainly this time of year is very evocative for us. So the question is, what's this all about? Right, and again, it's very natural. In fact, Hirsch develops the whole idea about the connection between Yetzias Mitzrayim, right, which is where we normally think of chametz and matzah, and the Beis Hamikdash. However, the Sefer Achinuch understands this differently, and the Sefer Achinuch says that the point of the prohibition of allowing the karban mincha to become chametz is, as anybody who's ever been to a matzah bakery is aware, right, that the process of keeping something from becoming chametz, right, requires great alacrity, right, and speed and paying attention to time, right? Again, that in a matzah bakery, it's designed to be as fast as possible. The Mishnah talks about back when matzah was baked at home, right? The idea that both the husband and the wife would be involved simultaneously in the production and the process of matzah, because you really need all hands on deck to be able to create, to do things quickly and not concern yourself that they are going to become chametz. So the Sefer Achinuch says this idea, right? It was the idea that we don't allow the karban to become chametz, is that one of the things that we are supposed to get out of the experience, right, if we brought a karban or can imagine ourselves bringing a karban, right, is watching kind of the speed and the one would imagine, again, we're told the general Kohanim Zrizimim that the Kohanim were very meticulous and fast in the way that they do things, and that itself is supposed to be inspirational about living a life of Zrizos, right, of the idea of being able to introduce into our lives the idea that we're not going to waste time. We're going to try to see time as something that we handle with great efficiency, right, as something very precious that we can achieve a tremendous amount with, right? And the idea that, and you can almost see this, right? Sometimes you go to a place, right, and where you see, this in certain ways was kind of the one of the great developments, right, of the assembly line, right? There's the idea that you see people working very quickly, very efficiently in a way to get things done. And there's something very inspiring about that. The idea of that is that anti-chametz mode, right? The idea that we have to move quickly and deliberately in doing things, right, is actually potentially a growth experience for us as well, right? The idea that indolence, that a certain kind of let's call it laziness or sluggishness, right, which is born out of not being invested in the things that we're doing. Now, again, you can speed through things in a sloppy kind of way. That's certainly not what we're talking about. The idea of cultivating that sense of focus, right, is something. The idea that the Jew who's bringing his carbon mincha, right, watching how the Kohen is, is dealing with this in such a way to make sure that it doesn't become chametz, right? That itself is a kind of a growth experience in general, and it's interesting to think about to apply kind of on a broader sense, right? What can we take out of our cleaning our homes from the presence of chametz, right? Are there elements of that experience, right, that shape us in general, right? Far beyond Pesach, nothing to do with chametz or not. Right? But the idea of being able to do a job meticulously and comprehensively, right, is something which is very much in the toolbox of the Avodas Hashem. That's example number one. Example number two. There's a mitzvah to light the fire, right? To make sure that there's always this constant fire burning on the Mizbeach. So the Sefer HaChinuch says something very interesting here. He says that the point of the fire, right, is the fact that the truth is, right, we know when the day the Mishkan was dedicated, right, a fire comes down from heaven, right, a miraculous fire. And the Sefer HaChinuch says the truth is that the fire on the Mizbeach, right, would burn continuously and miraculously, devoid of any human effort. He says, but that for the most part, God is not interested, right, in open miracles, right? God doesn't want to conduct the world, right? There's certain times where we need a nes nigla, an open nes, right? But the idea that God wants the world to run, at least for us to be able to understand the world as if it is running through a natural order, and that therefore miracles in general are things that God prefers to keep much more subtle, right, within the environment. So the mitzvah, according to the Sefer HaChinuch, of putting the wood on the Mizbeach, putting the wood on the altar, and going through the motions of lighting the fires on the Mizbeach on a daily basis, right? That the point of that is that we're helping God conceal the miracle, right? Now, this aspect of godliness, right, what is sometimes referred to as a kel mistater, right? That God is a God who fundamentally hides himself in the world, right? God does not need a world, right, where he has, his name kind of graffitied on everything that exists. God was here, right? That's not the point of the world, right, is not that as a stage for God's self-aggrandizement, right? And the idea perhaps that idea is also itself educational for us. Right? HaKadosh Baruch Hu could take credit constantly for all the miracles that exist in the world, for his creation of the world, so on and so forth. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, if you figure it out, that's up to you, right? But in other words, I'm not making a world to write my name in lights. And the idea that is fundamentally that value, right? That the things that we do, even the things of value, we are supposed to value them for their own sake, rather than as a tool for people to talk about us, to celebrate us, and so forth, right? That is very much at the core, right, of the often misunderstood concept of tznius, right? Of the idea that we are supposed to walk modestly in this world, right? That we are, just as God doesn't call attention to himself, doesn't call attention to his miracles, and in fact conceals them and gives us a mitzvah, according to the Sefer HaChinuch, of concealing the miraculous nature of the Beis HaMikdash for his own sake. It's so too that should be our attitude towards the things or our aspirational attitude, maybe that's a better way to put it, to the things that we do and that we achieve in this world. The reason we do them is not for the attention, right? Is not for the accolades or the adulation. We do them for their own self. And that just as God hides his miracles, right, that we are not supposed to be putting our accomplishments front and center, right? That's not supposed to be our motivation for the things that we do in life. Example number 3, right, is a prohibition that comes out of the world of the Beis HaMikdash, right? But very much is still part of the world of kashrus to this day. That's the prohibition of chelev, right? We are told simultaneously that there are fats in an animal. That on the one hand, there's a mitzvah. Those are the primary parts of an animal that are burned on the altar, right? Those fatty, specific fats within the body. And that whether there is a Beis HaMikdash or not, we are to avoid the consumption of those parts. So the question is, what is this about, right? The idea that this chelev belongs on the Mizbeach, right? But we are not allowed to consume it. So already a number of Mefarshim go in the direction, right, that this represents kind of the best parts of the animal. And in fact, that we know this from the first recorded sacrifice in Chumash, right? When Hevel, right? Remember, he brings the sheep. He says that he brought he says that he brought from the firstborn sheep and from the chelev, right? From their fattiness, right? And that was the carbon that was accepted, right? So the Rambam actually in Hilchos Yisur Mizbeach says that this is a paradigm, right? Obviously for the karbanos, that all the way from Hevel, the chelev is the critical part of the carbon, right? But it represents a more general lesson about avodas Hashem, about our service of God, right? The idea is that kol davar shu l'shem hakel sheyeh min hanoah v'hatov, right? That when we think about our avodas Hashem, right, whether specifically in the world of the carbon, right, or even in terms of just the way that we conduct our life, the idea that we are supposed to put the best of our resources, whether that be our financial resources, our time, our energy, which are incredibly valuable resources, right? The notion that the chelev belongs, as it were, to the Mizbeach, that even if you're not actually bringing a sacrifice, right? We refrain from the chelev because it reminds us, right, that our goal in life is not to be able to find the best things for us, but to be able to dedicate the best things that we have to a higher purpose. He says again, and he says, for instance, when you're building a shul, the shul should be more beautiful than your home, right? It's not the place for like the leftovers of the furniture. The shul represents the best the community has to offer, right? When you're feeding someone who is hungry, right? The needy, the poor, or whatever it is, right? You're supposed to give them good stuff, right? The best stuff that you have. It's not a question of, well, I have, I can afford all this great stuff for myself, right? I'm like somewhere in the back of a cabinet, there's an old thing of rice cakes that I'm going to give to someone else. Now, when I'm doing a mitzvah, I'm supposed to bring michel ve'et, right, from the richest parts of it, of what I have, and give that, as it were, back to God into the service of the mitzvah. So again, just to reiterate, right, that these are 3 different ideas that come out of the world of the karbanos in Parshas Tzav, right? The Sefer HaChinuch talks about the idea that we learn from keeping the carbon mincha, the flour of our chamates free, the value of speed and alacrity and what we call zrizus in Hebrew, right? And applying that, right? And there's that a mission-driven life should have a deliberateness of purpose that often translates itself into efficiency and speed. Secondly, right, the idea of tznius in the sense of seeing the world as not a place that our job in the world is not to have people look at us, that God conceals the miracle of the fire descending on the Mizbeach, right, by us lighting a fire on the Mizbeach, so it looks like it's natural, the way the natural world works, right, and that perhaps that too is more globally spoke, the fact that God does not need his nisim front and center and celebrates, but prefers that they be masked, right? Gives us a lesson in how we are supposed to relate to our own accomplishments. right? And to have that aspiration that we do them for their own sake, not for the sake of the fame and fortune that perhaps they may garner us, right? Or the number of likes on social media, or those kinds of external things that we often substitute for real dedication. Finally, the notion of the chelev, the richest fatty portions of the animal, which are burned on the mizbeach. That the Rambam learns from this in Hilchos Yisurim Mizbeach that this is a paradigm going all the way back to the sacrifices of Hevel. When it comes to our attitude to mitzvahs, whether they be interpersonal or the mitzvahs between us and God, right? The idea that we are supposed to look to the treasures, as it were, of our life, right? Whether that be monetary, whether that be time, whether that be energy and commitment, right? And that those things are supposed to be brought back to God, right? Rather than those things be secondary, right? A second thought in our lives. A good Erev Shabbos to everyone.
Thank you. Good Shabbos.
Thank you.